Hey folks, Cool18 here, and welcome to another video in our Unity base building game series. And in this episode, we're going to do two things. What I want to do is I want to stop having to manually set up the buttons here for our furniture. There's no reason why this list can't be dynamically generated. Well, I suppose that deconstruct furniture, build floor, and remove floor will be buttons that we create ourselves, but everything else is a button that is basically to build a furniture. Even a stockpile counts as a piece of furniture in this, so there's no reason this couldn't be built on the fly, and especially as we get more and more and more things, and later on obviously we're going to want to maybe categorize furniture into different groups, and it would be really nice if all those buttons just built themselves at runtime based on our little database. So that was like the first inspiration here for this video, but to be able to do this, we need to be able to access the list of all of our furniture prototypes, because this is what this is. And where are our furniture prototypes stored? Well, they are stored in the world, the instance of the world class that we have. This has all of our furniture prototype list. Great. But once again, we get that problem of, okay, so we need some sort of script that is going to create these buttons for us, and it needs to have a reference to the world object. So how do we get a copy of the world object? And we keep running into this time and time and time again. And really the way we most of the time catch our reference to the world is by hopefully having a reference to a tile somewhere. And tile has a little bit over here where it's like, oh, we belong to a world. And I mean, it makes sense that a tile belongs to a world, but it's sort of annoying that we always need to have a reference to a tile to find a copy of the world or do a variety of other things like that. So we would like an easy way to grab the instance of the world. There is another way that we could grab it kind of globally, because we do have a world controller, which is a game object in the game, and it does have a public instance of world. And I guess that would be good enough for any of our UI stuff, right? Because from the UI point of view, we can say, well, there's a world controller somewhere, it's got world. But again, I want to keep that sort of data versus interface separation. And so I would not like any of our data classes to rely on having a world controller, which again is sort of a little bit more on the UI side of things. So we're going to go and implement, a quasi singleton implementation here of the world. It's not going to necessarily be as robust as some others. But the idea is this, that we can go and do something like have, what are we going to call it? Something like public, current, or public world current. Actually, it should really be a static public world current, and really it should have a public getter and a protected setter, so that things outside the program can get it. But now we can do something in another piece of code. We can say world.current, and we will have the current instance of the world that way. And I'm going to set this in setup. When we set up the world, which this gets called whether we are creating a new world or if we are loading a world, setup world gets called first with a certain size and width. And presumably, well, right now, I don't think we ever clear out the old world or the old tiles, but really, if the tiles no longer keep a reference to world, right? Right now, tiles need to know what world they're in, but if we just go and pop that out, then there really shouldn't be anything that's got a pointer to world at any point. But there could still be some various internal linkages to things. Still, I think that might actually help with our garbage collection. I'm not sure. Anyway, when we set up the world, what we're going to go and do is say current is equal to this. Set the current world to be this world. To do we need to do any cleanup of the old world? Question mark? I don't know. But we're going to do this. So whenever setup world gets called, it's going to flag current. This is not a very robust implementation. We don't check to see if there already was one, if cleanup needs to be done or whatever. But it does ensure that anyone, anywhere in our code can just go world.current. Now, this is going to lead to a whole lot of syntax errors. Maybe. I save this, yes? And tile, save you. Maybe I didn't save the tile code. There we go. So we're going to start getting a whole bunch of these because a bunch of our code says, hey, job.tile.world. See, this is how annoying that is. Instead, now we can say something like world.current get tile at. Boom. And same thing over here. And then we'll just keep going through this list until we've taken care of all of these. Same thing here, world.current. I mean, at some point you've got to hope that the we've correctly done it where whatever is executing here is interacting with the current world, right? And we're not getting something called on an old tile, which I suppose can certainly happen. But we'll deal with that when we get there. So yeah, we're going to keep having these, current tile.world. Oh, there's actually a bunch of references to that specifically in this file. Can I do a find and replace for cur_tile.world and then replace it with that version instead? Save and go. And same thing here, we'll say tile.world and replace it with world.current. And what do you have here? t.world. Go there. And I mean, really, I think I probably should have done this from the start. I mean, I guess I stay away from globals in a certain way, but I think this would be a good example of a global that is actually a good thing to use. World.current, we're going to keep getting these all over the place. But you can see how many times we kept having, we wanted the world, and the only way for us to get the world is by going through a tile. Like here too, like, what is this? No. Just get the current worlds that. And, you know, some of these are a little bit longer in directions as well. And while they're not particularly slow to do, they're not necessarily great. Yeah, all these places where it doesn't really make sense that we need to go through the tile to get there. I think logically it's just stronger. And tile no longer has a reference to world. And actually doesn't need to be passed world in its constructor either, which is... There we go. So now everywhere we have world, we're going to replace it with world.current. And then the tile constructor over here no longer needs a reference to the world at all, because we have another way of getting it. And there's probably a few more of those. Boom. Yeah, see, why do we need a current tile to look up some other tile? Okay, that is it for the syntax errors, basically. So let's see if the game still runs in a way that makes sense. So far, we're okay. Let's load up a generic tile test. That looks all right. We'll build doors because they don't need materials. Okay, that looks like it's working fine. Let me try again with the load version. That's okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a door over here, and I'm going to hit load again. Sets up yet another world. You can see here in the code, world created with 10,000 tiles. Every time that runs, it sets a new world.current, but it seems to be working. At some point, we will have to go and make sure that everything is actually being cleaned up properly in garbage collection, that we're not keeping old references. We might want to put in some sanity checks every now and again that say whatever tile or whatever function we're getting called on is actually owned by the current world. Just a couple of those like sort of debug mode asserts, like literally only in debug mode, because those aren't things you necessarily need in production, but it'll catch if we've got any sort of weird things that aren't being cleaned up. That being said, I think that's probably okay. All right, so in the future, that will make our code a little bit simpler. And with that in mind, let's go and work on the user interface side of things. So if we open up our canvas and we expand our build menu over here. So in our build menu, we have a bunch of things that can be built. And what I want to do is I want to add, well, I guess I want a build menu. I want a component here, a new code called something like, I guess, build menu. I'm not going to call this a controller exactly, because we've got this UI category, so I'm just going to call this build menu, and I think I'm going to be happy with that. And I'm going to drag this into the UI folder. I said UI menu, I meant UI folder. So there's just code attached to UI elements. So the build menu now has a script. And what it's responsible for is, okay, that's the code. Great. Let me go and actually close everything over here. Ooh, that was very unresponsive, MonoDevelop. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to go and do that, and then reopen this one. Just easier to bulk. There's probably a menu option, actually. Yeah, close all. I could have done that. Anywho, so this build menu is responsible. It doesn't have an update. It's just on start. Add a button for building each type of furniture. like that. So every one of these buttons that was to build furniture, we're actually just going to go and delete. But I will save one. I'm going to make a prefab out of one of them. So let's say the button build door. I'm going to make a prefab out of you, and then I'm going to get rid of the wall, the stockpile, the oxygen generator, the mining drone station, and there we go. And then I'll actually also be getting rid of the build door here. But let me go and just rename a few things. Let's call this the build furniture. And actually, I guess that's pretty much it. So really, I could have just renamed this existing prefab. That's okay. Let's make a new copy of that. All right. So we have this build furniture prefab, and I'm getting rid of it. So we no longer have anything in this menu at all. But in our code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for a reference to the build furniture button prefab. And now that we've done that, over here in our inspector, we can see that there's a spot, of course, wanting a prefab. So what we're going to do is just drag that right over there. And then, back in our code, what we're going to do here is we're going to, for each furniture prototype in our world, create one instance of the button to be clicked. And then we're going to take advantage of our access to world.current.furniture prototypes. And the keys for this are the strings, which is the furniture sort of name / ID, which is all the same. That might change later on. We might have a different labeling system. But for now, this list of strings is what we're looking for. So what we're really going to want is a for each over here, string s in these keys. So we're going to loop once through every piece of furniture in that database. Then what we're going to do is we're going to instantiate a new game object, which is instantiate a build furniture button prefab. And I think we have to cast this to game object over here. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to tell this game object dot set parent is equal to this.transform. So we're going to create a new button and add it to ourselves. Let's run this just and see where it goes for us. If we go and hit play. There we go. Excellent. Okay, it ran. They're all labeled build door, and they're all called build furniture clone because we haven't done anything to the labels or anything like that. But it is running successfully once for each piece of furniture. That's groovy. So what else are we going to do? Well, I guess we're going to say, tell you what, we'll name the game object itself to be clear. So right now it's going to be something like button dash build, and then we add in the name of the piece of furniture. And then we actually have to change, this doesn't change the label of the button though. This just renames the game object in the inspector. So to rename the button, what we're going to have to do is change its text label. So if you look at the button build furniture over here, it's got a sub component. It's got a child game object called text, but more importantly, it has the text component on it. And this is what is the label of the button. So what we're going to want to do is gain access to that. Now, because it is a text component, and that's part of the new Unity UI system, which is in a separate namespace. So what we're going to want to do is say using unityengine.ui. That way we can make references to that text class. And then we can do something like this game object dot transform dot get component in children, get component in children. And we're just going to find the first instance of text in our children. Now, depending on the structure of this button, if it changes later on, we may have to make a tweak here, but this will work perfectly fine for us. And what we're going to try to do is just change the text property on that. And we're just going to call this, say, build, then a space, and then the name of the piece of furniture. That seems pretty good. Okay, let's give this a run and see what it does. Hit play. And there we go. Build wall, build door, build stockpile, build oxygen, which, yeah, it's actually oxygen generator, but it's being clipped. Oh, we might have to do something about that, but let's leave it for now. And then mining drone over here. Also, build stockpile doesn't necessarily make sense. We did have it called place stockpile before. We'll consider different ways of labeling these buttons in the future. The build floor should still work over here. Oops, I think there we go, done goofed. Build floor works great. Now let's try to build a wall. Nothing's happening. Why is that? Let's take a look at the inspector over here. So we have our button build wall over here. And what happens when this button gets clicked? Well, this on click routine fires, and the way it used to work is we had in here a reference to the build mode controller. And in the function, we said, oh, you're going to call build mode controller. You're going to call build furniture with the text of, this is wall, right, that we're working on? Yeah, with the string called wall in here. And now if I hit build wall, there it is. Now we can build these walls. Nothing happens because we don't have any steel plates. But we need this block to be filled out again. How do we get that to work in code? It's very easy to do in the interface, but how do you get it to work in code? Well, our button, so let's tell you what, let's grab an actual reference to it. So our button B, which is part of our new game object, get component, we have a button component. It's got, there we go. We've got this. And in this, we have an on-click property. And what it wants is it wants listeners. You can register. This is an object of type, where was it? On click. It's an object of type button clicked event. It already exists. When you create a button, this button clicked event should already exist as part of the button. So you've got an on click on here, and it's got a bunch of things, including the ability for us to specify more listeners, more things that want to be told when the button is clicked. And we can register multiple ones of these. If you've seen these, we have callbacks like this in our program all over. Now, we use the action type of thing. Like this is a specialized class, but if this were an action like we use everywhere else, we'd probably be able to go plus equal and then add a little function here to get called. But in this particular variant, we specifically add a listener, and then it wants something that fits a certain signature. Basically, it just needs a delegate here. It's going to work very, very, very similarly to all of our anonymous lambdas and whatever. In fact, it's basically the same thing. But the syntax for it is we say, listen, it's a delegate, and this is the thing that gets called. When the button gets pushed, we call code that's in this block. And what are we going to call? Well, we're going to need a reference to our build mode controller, BMC. We'll just find it at runtime, which is fine. This is only going to run once and start, so this is going to be okay. Find object of type, build mode controller. And we could test to see if we found it successfully, but it's in our scene, so it should work. And if it doesn't work, we'll get an error. It'll be quite clear. So when the button gets clicked, we want to call build mode controller dot set mode build furniture, and this would like a string of the furniture type, so we can just pass it in S. And oh, it needs a semicolon over here. So there we go. So every time this loops, a new version of S will get instantiated and assigned based on this phrase, and this will get locked into that. It should. I'm trying to remember. I think string S gets sort of instantiated within each loop as a separate object for closures. Let's pretend I'm not talking about this and confusing you guys. Either this will work or it won't work. We'll find out in a second. So let's go and hit run. And we've got our buttons. Let me go and just build some floor down here. And because the wall, well, I guess we can. Ooh, we got mining drone. Why is that? Okay. Yeah, the closure is not working right. If we take a look, oh, interesting. It doesn't actually show up in the user interface. How curious. Okay, we can cancel this. I'll hit build stockpile. I get mining drone. Hit build mining drone. I get mining drone. I click. It does build the mining drone. Why is everything, no matter what button I click, running the mining drone construction as opposed to something else? Okay, this is what I was worried about with the closures. Aha. What happens is when we call add listener and we pass this delegate's got a piece of code where it's, referencing this and it's referencing the variable S. The problem is that within a for each loop, okay, the S, it's not a fresh version of S every time. Instead, S gets changed on every loop. And as a result of that, these delegates are all just bound to S in its finalized form. So the first time it runs, the first thing it does is I guess build a wall. Let's take a look at the list. Yeah, so S gets set to wall. It sets up all the button with wall. Great. And the delegate is just when you push this button, call this function and pass it S. Now, at that time, it's wall. But the problem is when the next one runs and sets up the button for door, at that point, S is equal to door, and S stays equal to door. Instead, what we have to do is we have to, within here, is do something like instantiate a new variable within the for each block, as opposed to within this part over here. A couple of different ways to do it. We could loop through it in a few different ways, but for the sake of illustration, let's call it something like object ID. Set it to S here, and then use object ID in here. And unless I am wrong, and God, I hope I'm not, unless I am wrong, now when we say build a floor over here and hit build wall, aha, walls, build door, door, build mining drone, mining drone, assign a stockpile, assign a stockpile. See that? Now it's working. And the reason is that this delegate call here links to object ID, and you get a fresh, completely new, because because we're defining this variable within the block. Each one of these delegate calls is bound to a different version of object ID instead of all of them pointing to the same S, which then gets reassigned in every loop. So a little bit of a gotcha here when you do these sorts of things. It just depends on where you're referencing a variable. But it's equivalent. Basically what this is the same as saying string foo equals blah in here, and then binding to foo. It doesn't matter if you change foo in here to, you know, some other variable, like make it an integer that increases, or bind this one to S or whatever. This is the same foo every time, which means all of your buttons would call the exact same text. So referencing S over here is the same as this, because this S exists outside of this block, therefore it's updating the same one and not what we want. So instead what we want is, we want this object ID, which is fresh and different on every single loop. And I'm missing my semicolon. There we go. Now these buttons should be working. I think I left them in a working state. Let's just load up the pathfinding test because it looks a little bit better. Yep, doors, awesome. And then we can build a mining drone over here. We're getting some notices about, you know, some things don't have building prototypes, and that's fine. You are grinding out a little bit of metal plates, and then we can set up these build jobs, and you will go and slowly build these walls one at a time, and then accrue some more metal plates. Awesome. Okay. I'm happy about that. I would still, I think, like multiple buttons, but obviously it would be very easy. We could split this build menu into a couple of different objects. One which has, you know, some of these floor things versus furniture. I guess we'll do that now. What the heck? Let's take this build menu. I'm just going to duplicate this. And then I'm going to move it. Oh, I hate that. You know, collapse this and then go up there to get everything to be in a place where you want. This is going to be the furniture menu. And we're going to take this. And do I have the UI layer turned off. There we go. So now I want to see the UI layer again. So I'm going to take this furniture menu and I'm just going to drag it out over to the right like this. And in the furniture menu, I'm going to remove the floor, deconstruct, and all those. So it's actually blank. You can't see it right now, but it does still definitely exist. Did this position get reset? No, I think we're fine. And the build menu, I'm actually going to remove the build menu script on here. So it's a little inappropriately named. So I guess what I should do is, I don't know if it'll still have the reference. Let's give it a try. I'm going to rename this script to the furniture build menu. Do that. Did I spell it right? No, I did not. Furniture build menu. And then in this file over here, which is then going to get reloaded automatically, or not reloaded at all. Okay, let me try that again. Just open up, rename you to that. There you go. That's a little clearer. So the build menu object does not have that script at all. The furniture menu does have the furniture menu and everything is linked in. So now if I hit play, we now have two menus. One to build the floor, and one which has a list of furniture going in there. We'll probably want these to be buttons that sort of expand later on, but for now, that's going to be okay. And we could also make the furniture menu wider so that the oxygen generator shows up properly, but I'm going to leave it as is, and that's going to be good. We're still moving in the right direction, so that's always a positive. Thanks for watching another episode, folks, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you everyone who pledged on Patreon in April and who are supporting these videos from May through to early June. And to these mic check level supporters, we've got Wes Oldenboiving, Craig Mortel, Neil Balaki Milner, Speedy Savant, Valiant Cake Fiend, Aaron Toivson, Marius Field Vold, Jan Torrevel, Julian Auger Lafont, Stephen Stager, Michael McClintock, Kale the Quick, Drazion, Bite Rash, Adjective, Jason Yanti, and to absolutely everyone who watches and shares and favorites and subscribes to these videos. Appreciate you all. Thank you very so much, and I'll see you next time.